In this session, I'm going to speak about stride piano playing. It's one of the things I get asked about most often, and there are a number of ways that a solo pianist can accompany themselves. I should say a solo jazz pianist. But stride piano is one of the most effective and one of the most common, I guess. It can also be one of the most thrilling, depending on the tempo that you're taking. In case you're not familiar with the term stride piano, it's really something that comes out of ragtime. So when we have something like we can think of it very simply as taking a chord. So if we know the first chord of a piece is a C chord, C triad, and just breaking it up. It's really that simple, and you can get a pretty good effect. And that's basically what was happening with ragtime. Stride piano playing, I typically think of the distinction between the two as being that instead of just single note as our bass part, and I should step back a second to say usually the way it works is that on beats 1 and 3 in a typical 4/4 time, we're playing a bass note. Think of it as the actual bass player in a jazz group. And 2 and 4, even though we're playing notes, and in most cases, think of that as the harmony, meaning that if on beat 1 and 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, we have a single note. On beats 2 and 4, we typically will have more than one note. So 2 or 3 notes, or even more perhaps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So the 2 and 4 is very, very significant because it's a 2 and 4. If you're familiar with jazz music, 2 and 4 is where the drummer usually puts the hi-hat. And that's the feel in jazz, is that if you hear a jazz musician snapping, you're usually going to hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Just as an aside, if you start playing stride piano or ragtime, it's a great thing to get to the point where you really feel the 2 and 4. And the best test of that is to work with a metronome, where the metronome, instead of beating 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 1, 3, beats 2 and 4. And that's typically how a jazz musician would practice with the metronome anyway, but that will allow you to get that feel. So our bass part then, 1 and 3, our harmony part, 2 and 4, mimicking the hi-hat and giving us the jazz rhythm, and then back to the difference between ragtime and then maybe its sort of progression and development into stride piano is that instead of playing just single notes, we start to maybe play octaves. Now there are other considerations as well. Usually ragtime doesn't involve improvisation, and stride piano players usually are incorporating improvisation, and so that's also an important thing. But taking a single note, making it an octave, and then we start to have these big jumps. And I started off by saying it could be very thrilling, and it's very virtuosic. So that's what I mean. You could have something jumping all over the piano, so it's not something that's easy at all. And it has just a great feel to it. It almost puts a smile on your face every time if it's done well. So first thing I'd like to tell you is, now that we've talked about the rhythm, is simply how do we know what notes to play? Okay, and the notes to play are pretty simple, because as long as you understand a harmony, then it tells you what notes to play. So if we start with the C7 chord, for example, C, E, G, B flat, and then we just break that up, that's pretty much what it boils down to. Now, of course, it's going to sound better or worse depending on how you play those notes. We all know that you can play a C7 chord like that, or like this, or like this, or like this. So we can invert it. And we could even take it from what I would call a closed voicing, meaning that it's within an octave, to an open voicing. And this will actually be more significant for our bass parts, and I'll show you that in a second. So there's more than one way to play a C7 chord, and that's the point here. If we're on a chord for more than 2 beats, typically we'll play our bass part on, or the root note, excuse me, on beat 1, harmony on beat 2, and then the 5th of the chord, in this case G, on beat 3. I'm just going to take it from a C7 just to a straight C triad. It'll sound a little bit. So that's our bass part. We've all heard that before. So as the harmonies change, right now, just to give an example, I'll play a typical turnaround progression, which means a 1-6-2-5-1 progression. In the key of C, it means we're going to play a C chord, and then an A7 chord, let's say D minor, 7, and then G7. So this is what we call a turnaround, a 1-6-2-5. If you're not familiar with the numbers I'm throwing out there, if you just think about a C scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that's why we call it the 6th chord, because it's a 6th note, 6th interval. Major 6th, and then keeping that same logic in mind, the D becomes the 2 chord. In this case, I'm playing D minor, and the G becomes the 5 chord. So we have this 1-6-2-5. So we could have a very simple stride or ragtime pattern. Want to progress to what I showed you earlier, which is instead of playing just single notes, to playing maybe octaves. So then we would have something like now, a few of you may have noticed on a couple occasions I actually played more than an octave. I played a 10th, and I had to fight the urge to not do that, because for me that's a little bit more natural. That's the next step, and so I'll jump to that since I already sort of revealed it on accident. So instead of just playing, let's go back to our C chord. So we started with just taking the C, make it even easier, C triad, breaking it up. Then I spoke about playing an octave, and now we can take a 10th. So just a minute ago I described the 1-6-2-5. 10th, by interval of a 10th, we just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we get that. So this is a great sound, and for me this is what stride piano, when I think of stride piano playing, I think of these tenths in our left hand on beat 1 especially. Or even beat 3 if we have 2 chords per bar. So in this case, the rhythm that I'm thinking is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So C, A7, D minor 7, G7. So I'm changing chords half notes. So in this case, if I play now, on some of these chords, I'm playing a 3rd note, not just the 10th, not just C and E, but a 3rd note, and that's either the 5th of the chord or the 7th of the chord. Best thing to do if you're not real familiar with lead sheets, jazz harmony, or just chords in general, is to write out what each of these chords are, or if you decide to apply this type of playing to a particular standard tune, write out what all the chords are, because once you have it in front of you, then you just need to distribute the notes, and that becomes easy. It's trying to do 2 things at once that can become complicated. So I'm moving a little bit quickly through the harmony with an understanding or with a hope that many of you understand that. But if you don't, just take a step back. C chord, A7, D minor 7, G7. Write those notes out, and then you can distribute them. So as I said then, getting to the tenths, in a lot of cases I'm playing a third note. On this C chord, I'm playing C, G, E. On the A, usually including the seventh of the chord in there, in this case G, so I have A, G, C sharp, D minor, also the seventh, D, C, F, and then G, F, and B for G7. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, my hand can't reach that. Here's one of the beauties of stride piano playing. It's cool if your hand can't reach that because it's very hip to roll the chords. Now, it might get a little bit old to do that every time, but if you think about it, if you can get a good feel going, the sound is like a drummer, has this percussive element to it. Every time there, I'm just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And a little tip, I would think about the top note, your final note, being on the downbeat, being on with the pulse. 1. And again, slower here, I'm just playing root, fifth, and third, but the third being on top, so really a tenth is be the best way to describe that. On beat 3, because I'm staying on the same harmony here, I'm playing the fifth of the chord. Now, we don't want to have the fifth of the chord. We don't want to try a tenth there, because a tenth there would end up, in this case, being the third of G, which would make it a G chord. And in fact, right now we're just thinking this is just a C chord. So playing just octave G on beat 3, we still hear C chord. Right now I've added the sixth note to my chord, so I'm playing a C6. All right, so now I go back to my 1, 6, 2, 5. Now, with regards to 2 and 4, you should think of this as an independent part. So if your beat 2 plays a C6 chord in this position, maybe your A7, which would be the next chord, goes there, and then maybe your D minor 7 goes here, and maybe your G7 goes there. So this as an independent part, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. There's almost a little counter melody that's going on. So again, if you write out each one of these chords, then you can develop a nice progression of chords where the voice leading is very effective. It's what you want. So if I'm going to take this. Just that first thing I happened on. Now we can even start hearing the 2 parts. And that's basically what stride piano boils down to. Now, there are a couple fun little tricks, not tricks really, just variations on that I'll point out. And one is that instead of always playing 1 and 3 in the bass and 2 and 4 in the as our hi-hat or as our harmony, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We can switch that up occasionally for a little variation. So we can have 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. On and on and on. Just a little rhythmic variation will go a long, long way. And in fact, there I was occasionally leaving just a rest in as well. Much of the music that you would be likely to apply stride piano playing to, the Great American Songbook, jazz standards basically, moves in a very predictable way, harmonically, as does most classical music and even Baroque music as well. So it's in no way, shape, or form to imply that the music is simple. It's just the way harmony moves and the way our ears expect to hear it. But we hear the expression or the progression 2-5-1. In fact, when I was demonstrating, I mentioned 1-6-2-5-1. Very important to notice here that from the 1 to the 6th is either up a sixth or you can see it going down a third. But after that, the 6 to the 2 is down a fifth, 2 to the 5 down a fifth, and the 5 to the 1, of course, down a fifth. So this is the most common movement in really all Western music, certainly in, as I said, the Great American Songbook, jazz, tunes that you would apply this to. And that allows us to do a very, very cool thing that I call the walk-up. So now this works most effectively when you have a dominant 7 chord. So on the A, so I played my C chord, then on the A, I was playing A7, so that's a dominant 7. Sometimes I just call it a 7 chord. So in this case, A, C sharp, E, G. Then the 2 chord, instead of playing D minor 7, I'm going to play D7, meaning that I have F sharp, D, F sharp, A, C. So again, for the A7, A, C sharp, E, G, D, F sharp, A, C, and then for the G7, G, B, D, F. Okay? Now, because I'm moving, again, dropping by fifths, I can do this very cool little walk-up thing here. So we have on A7, we just march up the piano. If you can see the keys, you'll see I'm playing intense, A and C sharp, then B and D, C and D sharp, or E flat, C sharp and E. Now, this last time you may notice I'm add a third note occasionally. Here on these last three, I'm going to add the A. All right, now that hopefully sounds good already, but when it especially sounds good is where am I going from the A down a fifth to D or up a fourth? So now arrive at D. I apply the exact same. So then we have this great bass part. Now if I put my tenths in there, then to G, and I arrive back at C. So this is a great, great sound. We would hear it very often. There are many standard tunes that follow an AAB pattern. In fact, to be even more specific, what we might call what we would call rhythm changes, which is the form that George Gershwin first used and I got rhythm. But hundreds, thousands of songs literally have been written based over this same chord progression. And really, that progression is based off of what I've just been mentioning, a 1-6-2-5. So at the bridge, the B, again, A, A, B, A. At the bridge of this tune, we find harmonies dropping by fifths the entire way. So in the case of a tune that was in C, the bridge would actually start in E. First chord would be an E7. So E, G sharp, B, D. Why does it start on E7? Well, what's a fifth below E7? A7. What's a fifth below A? D7. And a fifth below D? G. And then what's a fifth below? C. So in effect, this bridge just functions to bring us back to our original key, which is C. So on the bridge then, each one of these chords gets 2 measures. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're back. And when I say back, we're back to our A section. So just to review, what I'm pointing out here is a typical AABA form in American popular music, and an opportunity to use this walk-up. Now, this walk-up can be used anytime you're moving down by a fifth, or you want to think of it as up a fourth, but I always think down a fifth because we think of cadences that way, 5, 1. But to showcase it here, so you can apply that formula anywhere you want. Look at it one last time in E here. Let's just look at the outer 2 notes because those are the most important. Notice my thumb starts on G sharp, the 3rd of E. Just goes up chromatically until finally, to get to A, it has to go a whole step. Again. Ends on B, which is the 5th of E. Then it gets, it starts over. The bottom part takes a whole step leap and then just goes chromatically the whole way. And that's just a great, great sound. So I'm going to close this session by, I've written out a little, I'll stick somewhat closely to this arrangement that I just wrote out of a very old tune called Indiana, or Back Home Again in Indiana. And what I'd like to show you first is I'm going to play it in A flat, and that's important. In case you try and figure it out, you might see it in a different key if you look in a real book, a jazz fake book. But what I want to show you is some of those concepts and and how and when I use them. So it starts in A flat. I'm going to start with the 10th. Actually, let me play just a little bit first. So in that little arrangement, most of what I'm playing is based off the concepts that I just spoke about. Starts off with the 10th, beat 2, you hear me play the full harmony. Now here I did a little something that I didn't talk about, which is just a little walk down to the next chord, which is F7. But on the F7, I played a 10th, there's my root, 7th, 3rd, and on the 3rd beat, I played the 5th as I spoke about. And I needed to do this because this chord is a full measure. Most of these chords here are actually a full measure. So remember the difference. When a chord is or one harmony is for an entire bar, beat 1, I might roll a 10th or play a 10th. Beat 2, harmony. Beat 3, go down to the 5th, but play it as an octave. All right? So, start. Now I get to a B flat 7, which is not really a surprise because the chord before it was F7, down a 5th, B flat. Now you might hear, listen a second. Now that's the walk up. That's the walk up, but I've just left out the first part. Okay, then moving on. Just the same formula. The downbeat, the root, the 7th, and the 3rd. In this case, a B flat minor 7. Harmony, beat 2, beat 3. And then in this case, I did something, a little chromaticism to get me to the next chord, which is then a walk up again, just like I showed you, an E flat this time. The same walk up. So most of the concepts I'm using are based on that which I spoke about earlier. Towards the end of this, I just put in this little arrangement a little variation, I guess, just to mix it up a little bit, where on this part, put these octave Cs, or pedal Cs as we might call it, because it stays on the same note over different harmonies. Beats 2 and 4, just to add a little bit of, just mix it up a little bit. But for the most part, it's sticking to the things I spoke about, playing on beat 1, the downbeat, on 10 with tenths, playing 2 and 4, giving my harmony, incorporating a walk up,